Hey, everybody, welcome back to the channel that takes you deep inside the San Francisco 49ers. I'm your host, Jack Hammer. It is 53-man cut down day. The 49ers' initial 53-man roster has been sent to the NFL. It hasn't yet been released, but let's go ahead. Let's get this going. It was the instant reaction. This is the 49ers 53-man roster instant reaction and analysis show. Let's go all through it. I already see there's some great comments over in the comment section that we're going to get to as well, because you guys are already on top of some of these names. Some of the cuts are coming through on Twitter if you just kind of look through, but the 49ers have not yet released the entire roster. Once that comes, I'll make sure that we go through that. But in the meantime, let's take a look at some of the cuts that we know of already that have happened today. Some of you guys pointing this out over in the comment section. First off, Raphael 5629ers, member of the Toolbox, says Qwuantrezz Knight released. Not much of a surprise here. Knight, a really nice defensive back, kind of a safety nickel slash safety type of a player, can play different spots, but just not. This isn't a surprise to me. I know that Knight looked good, and I would say that Isaiah Oliver didn't play as well as Qwuantrezz Knight during the preseason, and we'll see if Isaiah Oliver even makes the roster. I did not have him on my initial 53. If you saw the article yesterday over at the 49ers blog Inside the 49ers with the Santa Rosa Press Democrat, 49ers.pressdemocrat.com. You could check out what I thought the roster would look like. I did not have Qwuantrezz Knight on that initial roster. Again, a nice player who I think has a chance to make it to the practice squad, but I don't see him making it to the didn't see him making it to the 53 to begin with. Luke Walsh, another member of the Toolbox, says that according to Matt Mayoko, the 49ers have waived offensive lineman Ilman Manning, but would like to get him back on the practice squad per source. This one, again, not a surprise to me, but that's kind of, I'm basing this off of a couple of things. One, the fact that throughout training camp and during the preseason games, he was always working with the last group, and the competition he was playing against was always was never what he's going to face in an NFL game. Let's put it that way. The other thing, something that I noticed at practice, let me take you inside the 49ers here with what I saw at practice last week. The tackles and tight ends would work together every day on their run blocks on different plays. And there was a point during practice where Ilman Manning is the defensive player holding the bag, and the offensive line coach, tackles coach, is telling him where to line up. I don't know exactly what happened. I think Manning just kind of gave him a look like, are you serious, kind of thing. And basically the coach said, get the F where I told you to get. And that, to me, right there was pretty much the sign that Ilman Manning, I think, was kind of frustrated with where he was on the roster, knowing that he wasn't going to make the 53. And so I'm not surprised that Ilman Manning does not make the initial squad for the San Francisco 49ers. We have Gregus Khan. Another guy says, looks like Bell made the roster. I'm not sure who Bell is. Have to take a look at that one. Jalen Graham made the roster. That would make sense to me. The linebacker, the rookie linebacker, I had him making my 53 man. If he makes it, that would be. I have both Graham, Andy Winters, both rookies making the roster, with the 49ers keeping 6 linebackers to start with. Then one of the things to keep an eye on here as that roster rolls out is Nick Bosa. He doesn't have to be on the initial 53 man roster because he's not in camp. So the 49ers can actually carry an extra player right now. And then when Bosa signs, then they can release him. That's somebody who maybe they're a little worried that's going to get picked up by another team, that kind of thing. So that's something to think about there. Real quick, Lucas, member of the Toolbox, says, hi, Jack. Hi, Lucas. Hope you're doing well. I always like to shout out Lucas. He's in one of the international contingent from Austria, checking it out. We got Jeremy Price, my guy. Jeremy, how you doing? He says, what up, Jack? What up, Jeremy? Texas Niner says, Jack, let's hammer it out. So let me see what else you guys have already in terms of names. This is another one. Luter, Gregus Constant, both Luter and Mosa do not count. Right. Well, I would say Darrell Luter is the rookie. So he's not going to, nobody would expect that anyway, as much as Nick Bosa. I think that's a little bit different. Luter hasn't even practiced in training camp. He's been out the entire camp with a knee injury, had a big brace on his knee last week, at practice. So another one of those players who it doesn't seem to make sense there. Let's see what else we have. Just kind of looking through on Twitter to see what's going on when it comes to 49ers. Let me just take a look here. like I said, we come on a little early. I didn't have the roster, but I told you guys we were going to do this, and it's going to be an instant reaction because as soon as it's broken, we are going to break it down. David Lombardi, another name who is not on the roster, is going to be Jason Poe. David Lombardi mentioning that on Twitter. Jason Poe will not be on the practice squad. Another player the 49ers would like to try to add to their practice squad if possible. Again, Jason Poe, this is not a surprise. Didn't look very good in the preseason games this year. Just not very many surprises at all there. Another player that I thought did really well, I thought might have an outside chance. And a lot of people were talking about Il Manning. For me, when I was looking at this roster, if there was going to be a surprise along the offensive line, it was going to be Leroy Watson. Now, I think Leroy Watson had a really nice camp. All that focus on Il Manning, and Leroy Watson was the guy who one day in practice when the 49ers didn't have Trent Williams out there, they didn't have Jalen Moore. It was Leroy Watson who stepped in at left tackle and played with that first team offensive line and did a really nice job. I really like Leroy Watson, and like Gregus says, he needs another year, and I think that's where the 49ers are on it too. This is a guy, Watson's a guy who was a tight end at UT San Antonio with Spencer Burford, making that transition to tackle in the NFL. That's tough. The thing to like about Watson is he has really nice feet. I think that's the other big thing too. So that's a good part of it. Gregus, you just keep feeding me, guys. I'll just keep talking about him. Jack Coletto, it looks like Jack Coletto not going to make the roster. Again, I don't this one, again, Jack Coletto, you're not going to keep two fullbacks, right? So he's a guy that Coletto's a really smart guy, a really hard worker. I think like Kyle Juszczyk can do a lot of different things. For the 49ers here, waiving Coletto makes sense. The reason that it makes sense is because I don't think there's very many teams around the NFL that use fullbacks anymore. And I think that the 49ers can get Coletto through waivers, get him back onto their squad. This feels like it's going to be the final season for Kyle Juszczyk in San Francisco. I understand he's under contract beyond this season. Everything around him and the way that he's talked and just looking at his contract and where the 49ers are financially moving forward, it would make sense that this is going to be the last year for Kyle Juszczyk. I just don't see the 49ers wanting to restructure his contract. He's an aging player. Doesn't mean that he's still not a valuable player, but he's a little bit older. And they cut me. Can you believe that? They cut Jack. The jackhammer was cut. I am out of here. No, that's okay. Kalia Davis. I have not seen anything on Kalia Davis yet. Let me go through. Let me see what I can find. If you guys already heard about Kalia Davis, that would be a little bit more of a surprise. I had Kalia Davis. He's right there on the edge. I think when you look at Kalia Davis, the biggest thing here is this is a guy who dealt with injuries coming into the NFL. So he missed all of last year, except for a couple of weeks where they brought him back and they allowed him to practice. They never activated him. This year in training camp, he started off decent. And then injuries set in, and he missed a good portion of camp again. So that's a bad issue for the 49ers in terms of their ability to bring him in. That's just kind of looking through, and you guys are on top of it. But so that one, Coletto, a really good guy. Kalia Davis, I haven't seen anything on Kalia Davis, but I really liked what I saw from him prior to the injury this offseason. Then he was injured. He came back, and his first day back was last week. It might have been Monday. But one of his first plays for Kalia Davis on the field was a run right up the middle, and he dropped the running back with a shoulder in the hole. The running back's right there, and he nailed him, and he just dropped him flat on his rear end. Just a tremendous hit. And we saw it, again in the game on Friday night against the Chargers. Kalia Davis' ability to stop the run there. So good stuff in terms of that. Okay, I got you. Thank you. You said Bell. I wasn't thinking about Ronnie Bell. There was a running back by the name of Bell too, and I had a brain fart. I wasn't thinking about Ronnie Bell. Yeah, Ronnie Bell making the roster, that makes sense. Especially when you look at where the 49ers were. If the the 49ers, if they didn't have the injuries to McLeod and to Danny Gray, then you might say that it's a surprise. But with McLeod and Danny Gray both not expected to be ready for week 1, it makes sense that Ronnie Bell is going to make the roster here. He's also a really good kick returner. We've seen that from him. The 49ers really like to use Ronnie Bell. They're utilizing Ronnie Bell, I should say, in a kind of as the Deebo backup, if that makes sense. Think of all the ways that they use Deebo Samuel, and those are all the types of things that we've seen them do with Ronnie Bell last week during practice. The lining up in the backfield, running the ball out of the backfield, catching screens and all that kind of stuff. We saw Ronnie Bell in that role last week, which is also the role that we saw for Ray McLeod back in 22, right? Ray McLeod was the 49ers Deebo times 2, that guy, making some nice plays and doing, the big run against Washington, all those types of things that we saw from him. We're seeing that from Ronnie Bell. Ronnie Bell, one of the best rookies in the NFL in terms of one of the best wide receivers, period, when it comes to run after the catch. When it came to preseason, he had really good yak numbers. So a lot to like there about Ronnie Bell and where he is right now. Jack Coletto, like I said, that one, he's gone. You look at the teams that use fullbacks, the Jets, the Dolphins, Seahawks, Broncos, Chiefs. They were all teams that, according to Matt Barrows, that were looking to sign him as an undrafted free agent. We'll see now if they decide to bring him in at the end of camp. That's a tough one, but we'll see how this works out for the 49ers. The Jalen Graham, keeping Jalen Graham on the roster, I really like that one from the standpoint that I felt like Jalen Graham's an interesting player to me, because if you look at Jalen Graham, all the reports right now are that he's going to make this roster. Now, again, none of this is actually official. It's all based on reports and some speculation based off of things. So if you look at a guy like Jalen Graham, this is a guy that I really like. I looked at these guys, and Jalen Graham, to me, stood out right away when we got there during OTAs and minicamp. He stood out, and I said my thing with Jalen Graham was he looks and moves like the 49ers like their linebackers to move. My question with him was always, is Jalen Graham going to be a guy that can stop the run? Because he was kind of a tweener in college. He played that safety / linebacker type of role. And so I wanted to see how he was going to transition into pads during training camp. Wanted to see how he was going to be able to thump in there. And he didn't disappoint. He was able to come in right away. He was able to stand up against the run, do some nice things. There's some areas of improvement that he would have to get better at. I think he's going to help them in terms of special teams if he is indeed on the 53-man roster. And beyond that, when you looked at him, one of the other things is not only Graham, but Fred Warner played that type of role when he was at BYU, that safety / linebacker type of role. And I've said this a few times, but if you were to put Jalen Graham and Fred Warner next to each other in their uniforms and like facing away from you so you couldn't see their faces, and all you were doing was looking at them in the uniform without a number on, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. They're very similar. Their body types are very similar. They're both lean but thick at the same time, if that makes sense. They're muscular but lean, very athletic type of players. I think Warner is about an inch taller than Graham, but other than that, they are very, very similar types of players. Jack Coletto can play quarterback. Yeah, he did a little bit of that during his time at Oregon State. He played all over the place. He was a jack of all trades. He did all kinds of different things. My sister lives up in that area, in the Corvallis area. She was a big fan of Jack Coletto. I heard a lot about Jack Coletto once the 49ers made that move to bring him in. I agree with this. No way that Ronnie Bell was going to clear waivers. No way. I didn't think so either. That's an easy one. That one makes too much sense for where they are right now. Really quick, while I have everybody here, there's been some reports lately in terms of the 49ers, in terms of the 49ers quarterback position and Brock Purdy. There was a report yesterday from practice that Brock Purdy did not take part in all of the drills, that he was stepping out of the drills. And it was reported as if this was a new development. And I just want to say really quick that for those of you that have been paying attention to this channel throughout the training camp reports, you may remember that back in early August, it was actually August the 8th, was the first day that I recognized this happening. And I reported it here on my channel, and I reported it on the Inside the 49ers page, 49ers.pressdemocrat.com. Did it on both of those, and just made a small note of it. It was something that I noted. I was like, oh, that's weird, because I've never seen Brock Purdy step out of line before when working with the receivers. I had noticed him not making all the throws when working with the coaches and the ball boys. I had noticed that, but I had never noticed him stepping out when it was with the receivers. And maybe part of it was because August the 8th was the first day that fans weren't there either. And so maybe part of it was that now that the fans weren't there, he was able to, they just kind of changed it up a little bit. But here's the thing. It's a long way from me saying that when I saw that, I asked the 49ers PR staff on the field, because there's certain things that we're supposed to not report and certain things that we can report. There's a fine line with that. And so I saw it, and I went up to one of the PR people, mentioned what I was seeing, asked if it would be okay to report it. I was told to then go speak with somebody else, where I went over and talked to them about it. And I was told the same thing that the reporters that were on hand yesterday were told, which was, it's just on a pitch count. I don't think it's anything different. And I still went ahead and I still put it in my article because I thought it was something of note, and I felt like it was something for everybody that they would be interested in seeing, that the guy that's supposed to be the starting quarterback isn't taking all the snaps. But that was 3 weeks ago. And 3 weeks later, we're having everybody else all of a sudden bring it up. And the only reason that I've been asked a couple of times, Jack, why do you think nobody else mentioned it before if this was happening? And I'm just going to say the only thing that, to me, that makes sense is that because this was like one of the first practices where there was only 3 guys on the field, and one of those guys wasn't Trey Lance when they were in those, because in the other practices during this camp, when there's only been 3 quarterbacks out there, one of those quarterbacks was not Brock Purdy. So maybe him stepping out all in this practice caught people's attention and they started talking about it. I'm not sure. When I saw it the first time, I mentioned it to 2 folks. One of them a beat writer, and I spoke with him during a break at one point saying, hey, this is what I saw. This is what I told the PR folks, and this is what they told me. How should I report this? And we had a nice little conversation, and he gave me a quick little heads up on how to do it. And he had said he was going to put it in his write-up. I don't think I looked at it just a couple of days ago, and I didn't see anything. But just wanted to hit that up. The little Brock Purdy thing, I don't think there's anything to that story. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys are aware of that. Juju's highlight says, are you going to practice today? There's no practice today. The 49ers are off today. Tomorrow there will be a late practice. There'll be a late meeting in the afternoon with Kyle Shanahan. Then there'll be John Lynch. Then there'll be a practice after that. I will not be in attendance tomorrow. I had some car work getting done yesterday because I was putting in about 250 miles a day going back and forth to practice. So a lot of miles during training camp. Had to get some stuff done on my car, a couple things, and then had to get something done yesterday. Tomorrow I'm not going to be up there because tomorrow is my son's first high school football game. He's a freshman, and so I'm going to go watch his game. So I'm not going to be up in Santa Clara. I won't be able to make it back to the game in time. So I won't be there, but I'm right now tentatively scheduling to be there on Thursday for their walkthrough practice. Then I'll be up there next week as they start to get ready for the season opener. And then I definitely 100% will be in Pittsburgh week 1 to watch them take on the Steelers as I was last year when I was in Chicago. So hopefully this year it goes a little bit better than it did last year. Just kind of looking through some reports as we still don't have the official roster out just as yet. But another name that is showing is Deshaun Jameson. Is no word yet on whether he's made the camp. But I will say, when you look at D'Shawn Jamison, this is a guy who caught my eye early on. Didn't really stand out much during rookie camp. That couple of days that we were there for rookie camp didn't really stand out there. Then we got into OTAs. Didn't really stand out much in OTAs either. And then we got to minicamp. And once minicamp hit, all of a sudden, this kid, he was number 49 at the time. He's 22 now, but at the time he was number 49. And it was just like, why? Who's this 49? He's all over the field. Every time we look to see, who's making the play on the ball, it's 49, and it was D'Shawn Jamison. And I think part of the reason that he showed up so much at the end of that was because during OTAs, there's certain levels of physicality that they can utilize in each session. And by the time they get to minicamp, it's pretty much game on, and you can start to jam the receivers and use your hands and be more physical. And that allowed him to play to his strengths, because he's a really good man cover corner. He's a really good physical type of player. I think he struggles a little bit in zone coverage when he's playing in space, but Jamison, when he's able to get his hands on receivers, is really good. And I think we'll see how this roster goes. Gregus Khan is saying that from what he's hearing, Jamison's made the roster. When you look at Jamison, this is a guy who, if he makes the roster, there's a possibility here that Isaiah Oliver doesn't, because you have Jamison, you have Samuel Womack, and you also have Deommodore Lenoir, who can play in that spot. So there's a possibility. I would expect, with the whole Nick Bosa thing, Isaiah Oliver might make the roster originally, right? Because there's going to be somebody. Here's the other thing to remember: when this first 53 comes out, when we get it to announce it here, hopefully soon, what we're going to see is you got to remember, it's the initial 53. It's not the final 53, because that 53 is going to change. It's probably going to change a couple of times even before week one. You're going to see a couple of guys make the roster who might end up on IR, those types of things. So we'll keep an eye on it and see how it goes throughout. So that's one of the reasons to kind of keep it locked in here to Inside the 49ers with Jack Hammer, the spot, right? This is it. Let me just looking through to see. The 49ers are really slow on this. You would think that, they have a deadline. I should have settled this thing for the maybe 1:30, but that's all right. We're getting through it. Hopefully you guys are enjoying the show. If you guys have any questions or certain players that you want to talk, just throw them over in the comment section. I'll respond to them. This is the perfect time, because once the 53 comes down, that's what I'll be focusing my attention on. But let's see where we are. Let's see what you got. Cinnamon Kiss wants to know, did Ambry make it? Yeah, I think Ambry Thomas is a lock to make this roster. It hasn't been guaranteed by anybody, but I'm guaranteeing it. He's one of the best cornerbacks on the team. He's the guy that's been working primarily with the ones that has allowed the 49ers to slide Deommodore Lenoir inside as much as they have. If that's the direction that they go with, I think that's the direction. Luke Walsh says, formerly Twitter is strangely quiet on cutdowns. I think this is one of those situations where you're not really getting a whole lot of information. You're not getting it from the team. The team doesn't necessarily want this out. I think the players that we are hearing about, the reports on, those are coming from the players' agents, letting people know that their player has been released. So I think that's partly why. Yeah, there's no way Jair Brown gets released. Jair Brown's top pick of the draft. He's one of the backups. That it goes back to Quantrez Knight. He's kind of a safety nickel type of a cornerback. That's why I wasn't surprised to see Quantrez Knight not make it. So that's the direction there. I think he's going to make it. Willie Snead is a guy who I don't foresee Willie Snead making the roster unless the 49ers decide that they want to keep 7 to start with. I don't see Willie Snead making the 53. I don't see that being announced today. I think with Willie Snead, you're more looking at a situation where this is the player that the 49ers can want to bring back after the 53-man. So they're going to do their 53-man roster. They're going to have to make some moves, whatever they decide to do with Danny Gray. And also they've got Danny Gray. They've got Ray McLeod. again, you only have four healthy receivers. Like a guy like Willie Snead makes a lot of sense because you can have him on your practice squad, bring him up 3 times, those types of things. So I think we're going to see Willie Snead on the team. We're just not going to see him on the 53-man roster, if that makes sense. Nick Zakelj, he has been struggling, and we'll see where he lands. I think that the 49ers, if they keep, again, this goes back to Nick Bosa, if they keep an extra player, it might make sense for them to have 9 offensive linemen with one of those being Zakelj. But I think if they go with just 8, it's not Zakelj. It's going to be the two tackles, Jalen Moore, Matt Pryor, and then I think you have those are because neither one of those two really does a good job of switching from one side to the other. And then on the interior, you have a guy in John Feliciano who can play all 3 spots. He can play left, right, center, all of them. That's a fun game to play if you got a couple bucks and you're hanging out with your buddies. Play left, right, center, just like John Feliciano. You might even be able to make some money. I used to do that when once upon a time. That's always a good time. 490 East. Do you think the jackhammer gets cut and picked up? I don't see the league letting him sit too long. Jack Coletto, we were talking about this a little bit ago. I would be a little surprised to see him picked up by another team. There's a few out there that have fullbacks that would have interest in going and bringing him in. The 49ers are, running a risk there. Maybe they decide to go with 2 fullbacks on their initial 53 because they have Nick Bosa and he's not signed yet. Maybe that gives them an extra roster slot to play with. And by holding off on him to be right now, teams will kind of settle in other ways, and that'll allow them to hold him on and then sneak him through waivers later to get him to the practice squad. It's all about timing with some of this stuff. So that would be one of the options there. As far as Ilm Manning, that was actually Matt Miyoko put that out earlier as well. I noticed that he did not make the 53. Not surprised. Again, I talked about Ilm Manning earlier, and who was it over here? Luke Walsh saying that he wishes that the Fort Itchy would be getting reports on who made it instead of who didn't make it, and I agree. I have been chuckling to myself over the last most of the morning because I have all of the national guys on my Twitter, so that every time they tweet, I get a notification, and my phone and my iPhone, my iWatch, have been buzzing all day because every single person, it seems like everybody that they find out is being cut. It doesn't matter if who it is. There's some kind of a tweet that goes out about it. So it's been kind of funny to me. Some of that's cool because you can see guys that maybe your team wants to pick up, like a guy like Max Duggan, the quarterback from the Chargers. But some of this other stuff, it's kind of funny. So Robbie's saying, Jack, has there been any players from other teams cut today that you think the Niners should try to claim? I just mentioned one of them. Max Duggan would be a guy that you might try to. I think if you're claiming him right now, though, I think part of it is you have to add him to the 53. So, when you get into that, I think that makes it a little harder. So in terms of claiming a guy off of waivers, I think instead what you're doing is you're waiting until they clear waivers, and then you're going to make that move to try to add him later. A guy like, for example, veteran cornerback Desmond King, the Texans released him. King is a guy who I really liked as a possibility for the 49ers. And it was either a year or two ago when he was a free agent. I felt like he would have been a nice addition because of his ability to play in the slot. So, and he also has the ability to kick return, punt return. Desmond King would be a guy to take a look at. Probably not on the waiver wire, probably more of a guy that they'd want to sign later. So that they don't have to put them necessarily right on the 53, if that makes sense there. Let's see. The 49ers need to hurry up and get this out because it's already 1:30, and we've been going for about a half hour. I'd really like to be able to get you guys the roster as soon as possible. They're not doing it yet. The 49ers, they're still working their way. They're putting out their press release, I'm sure, which is why we haven't heard it yet. One of the players, Darrell Luter Jr. I think somebody had mentioned him earlier. It looks like for Darrell Luter Jr., he is going to end up on the 49ers PUP list, which means that he is out for the first 4 weeks of the season. And then after that, they can bring him back. But Darrell Luter Jr., he's missed almost the entire training camp for the 49ers. Again, sounds like they're going to be keeping the rookie cornerback on the PUP list, physically unable to perform. That means he will be out for the first 4 games of the season. So that's one of the things that is going down right now. C-Rex says, okay, Jack, what's the deal with the DN position? If Bosa doesn't sign, we are doomed. Yeah, I do. I hear you. And if the 49, if Nick Bosa isn't here, that's a huge hit for them, right? If you look back to 2020 when Bosa was lost in week 2, and that defense was still, I think, 6th fewest in terms of points scored. So that looks really good because points scored is what it's all about. Actually, it wasn't even points scored. I'm sorry. Yards allowed. They were 6th fewest yards allowed, but they were, I think, 17th in points scored. Part of the reason they were 17th is because that offense was turning the ball over, putting them in bad field position over and over again. But regardless of those numbers, it just seemed like that was part of the reason. Part of the reason they gave up so many points and they were so high in points compared to the yards was that field position. But that field position is also why the yards allowed wasn't as high. I felt like they were okay in that 2020 season without him. I felt like that 2020 team, if they just had a competent quarterback, was a team that would have made the playoffs. They were right there all the way down to like week 15 before they were finally eliminated. And if they had somebody that wasn't named Nick Mullins at quarterback, I think that was a team that could have been a playoff team. I think this team without Nick Bosa is probably a team that can be a playoff team because of how the NFC is and the rest of the players on the roster and the amount of depth that the number of talented players that they have. I think they can still be a playoff team. But in terms of like saying they're doomed, I would agree with that if you're saying that their Super Bowl chances are doomed. If Nick Bosa isn't here, there's no way that this is a Super Bowl roster. They absolutely 100% need Nick Bosa to be healthy and a big piece of their defense if they're going to make it to the Super Bowl. If they're going to beat a team like Philadelphia, for example, they need Nick Bosa and the pressure that he generates. Or even against the Cowboys, they need a guy like Nick Bosa. Those are some of the better teams that are out there. So I agree with you in terms of Super Bowl that they're doomed. In terms of being able to still be a playoff team, I think they can still do that if they don't have Nick Bosa. But it's definitely the priority for this organization is getting him done. Brandon Farrell says, how are they going to manage kicker to start the season? Are we keeping Moody active? I think that's going to be the case. We'll find out. We'll get a better idea of this here pretty soon, exactly where they are. I know there was a report earlier today that the 49ers had been looking around, were one of the teams that was really involved with discussions around kickers. That makes sense. I don't know how much discussion they'd been having around kickers as far as acquiring one. I think they really wanted to have themselves go out and get I think they wanted to trade a kicker. I think their plan was that they were going to trade Zane Gonzalez. That's partly why they go in that direction. But the injury there that he suffered in warmups before the game against the Chargers kind of eliminates that ability to trade him. And that's not really anything all that different. That's been Zane Gonzalez's MO throughout his entire career. Injuries have derailed him at every turn. I think it's kind of it was kind of just a funny coalescence of how he comes in and this kicker who's always injured comes to the 49ers and they give him number 10, the same number as a quarterback that they just let go who was injured all the time. So that's one of those things to think about when you look at Zane Gonzalez and his tenure here. But in terms of your more to what you're asking on your question as far as how are they going to manage it, I think Moody will be active. I think he's going to be fine. And then Greg is already answering the questions. Edward wants to know, do the 49ers leave room for Bosa on the 53? And as Gregus Khan said right below him, Bosa doesn't count towards that 53 until he signs. Because he's holding out. There's a designation for that, and so Although he's under contract for this season, he has yet to report. So he will not count against the 49ers 53 until he finally does report. He's at this point a no-show for camp. I don't know exactly what the designation's been on that, but he's signed. So it's not that he's not signed. It's just that he's not reported to camp, which makes that going on. J-Mail talking about 2020 and all the injuries. Yeah, there were a lot of injuries in 2020. And it's crazy that they were still able to stay so competitive. And it just really came down to the quarterback position and their inability there to not turn the ball over. That's such a big key piece of what the 49ers do. And it's a key piece across the NFL, right? You look across the NFL, you look at these teams, wins, losses. We talk so much about all these different players, positions, all this kind of stuff. When in reality, if you just look at the turnovers for most NFL games, the team that turns the ball over less is going to be the team that wins unless there's a big discrepancy in their talent. The 49ers have really lived and died by that over these last few years. You look at their numbers, and I think they're like 75% wins when they either win the turnover battle, when they turn the ball over less than their opponents, or the same, compared to like 25% when they do turn the ball over more than their opponents. So another one, kind of looking through. I'm looking to find out if there is any other news so far. I haven't seen any other news as far as cuts by the 49ers. Is there any that anybody else has seen that maybe I'm missing? Edwards saying, okay, to be clear, do the Niners carry an extra defensive end at the expense of another roster spot? I mean, they can, right? I mean, they can go ahead and carry. I think they're going to carry 9 defensive linemen. They can carry an extra defensive end until Bosa comes back. That would make total sense. I don't think that's even at the expense of another roster spot, right? Because if Bosa doesn't count against your 53, you can go ahead and you can keep, say, Austin Bryant, for example, or Kerry Hyder Jr., or maybe Robert Beal Jr., so we'll see. One of the names, and I haven't seen this one yet, and I've seen some people, it says the report, and I'll bring this up because I just saw this come across. Robbie says Kerry Hyder and Austin Bryant were both cut. That makes sense to an extent. Kerry Hyder, Austin Bryant. We'll see. The question I have here is, are they deciding that they're going to try to pull Robert Beal Jr., the rookie, through? I think that's a mistake. I think Robert Beal Jr., the Hyder and Bryant are players the 49ers can probably release from their 53 now, bring them back later. That's the way that the report from Mac Barrows came down, as Red Eye says there in the comment section. Procedural moves, the 49ers plan on signing both players back to the 53. So what that tells you is there's going to be some players making this 53 that are quickly going to be put on IR, or some kind of move is going to be happening that's going to allow them to make a change there to that roster. This fly's driving me crazy. I'm not seeing. So, yeah, in terms of Kerry Hyder, Austin Bryant, I really like Austin Bryant. Kerry Hyder's a nice player because of his ability to play both inside and out. He can play defensive end. He had 8.5 sacks, I think it was, or 8 back in 2020. We're just talking about that team. Austin Bryant is a guy who I think has really good quickness, and he stood out to me during training camp with his ability to get up the field, get around the edge, but also be able to set the edge in the run game. I like that part of his playing ability. Beal the IR would make sense, right? Noah Johnston says, inside the 49ers with Jack Hammer. Did you hear they traded Trey Lance? That's a good one. Hey, if you've got time at 3:00 this afternoon, if you're in the Pacific time zone, 3:00, Trey Lance will be speaking to the media out in Dallas. There goes the Trey Lance train. It's leaving the station. It's heading out to Dallas at 3:00. He will be doing his deal. Here are the roster moves for the 49ers. All of them are announced. The following players have been placed on the physically enabled to perform list. The PUP list is Darrell Luter Jr. The injured reserve list, the players that the 49ers have put on IR, kicker Zane Gonzalez, Taylor Hawkins, A.J. Parker, and tight end Cameron Latu. So the rookie tight end it's been placed on IR. He will miss this entire season. Zane Gonzalez, Taylor Hawkins, Latu, and Parker, they are on IR by being placed on IR now. They are done. They are not going to be playing this year. So Cameron Latu, a third-round pick at tight end for the 49ers, he is not going to be there. As far as the following players that have been released, you have Austin Bryant, wide receiver Chris Conley, tight end Troy Fumagalli. We just talked about Kerry Hyder Jr., T.Y. McGill, the veteran, running back Brian Hill, and Jeremy McNichols. The McNichols and Hill, McNichols was already cut a while back because of injury. They also released Anthony Miller, and they released Willie Snead. No surprises yet on any of these lists. Also, Alex Barrett was waived, Jack Coletto, Marlon Davidson, Joey Fisher, Miles Hartsfield, Keith Ishmael, Deshaun Jameson has been waived. So Deshaun Jameson waived as well. That means that Isaiah Oliver makes the 53. That is a little bit of a surprise based on the way that he has performed and the fact that he was just on the field all the way till the end of that game on Friday night against the Chargers. That's an interesting one to me that they've gone in that direction. Corey Luciano, who's an offensive lineman, Quantrez Knight, we talked about, Tate Martin, Marcelino McCrary Ball, Jason Poe, linebacker Curtis Robinson, cornerback Trace Willing, Leroy Watson, and Isaiah Winstead. So based off of what we heard, here's what we know right now. At quarterback, the 49ers kept all three quarterbacks. So if we go through the roster just based off of who the players are that the 49ers have released, let's go ahead. Let's start with the quarterback position to begin with. At quarterback, the 49ers have, to no surprise, they went ahead and they have Brock Purdy and Sam Darnold, and they've also kept Brandon Allen on their 53-man roster. So Brandon Allen makes the initial 53-man roster. No surprises there. I mean, if there was a surprise, I would say the only surprise would be that he makes the 53 in terms of Brandon Allen. There were some questions as to whether or not Allen was going to make that 53 or not. Then you get to running back, and the running backs that the 49ers have kept, they kept all the ones that you would expect. Christian McCaffrey, Elijah Mitchell, Jordan Mason, Ty Davis-Price, and Kyle Juszczyk. Those are your 5 running backs that the 49ers have kept. At wide receiver, they kept 6. So for the 49ers at the wide receiver spot, you have Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, third and Juwan Jennings. No surprises with those 3, and the same with Ronnie Bell, the first rookie. There was no surprise that I think there that Bell made it. Also on that initial 53, you still have Ray McLeod and Danny Gray, excuse me. So just looking through the roster moves that the 49ers just announced, those are the players. Now, again, we'll see the direction if there's any changes there in terms of the wide receiver position, tight end, the Latu move. So when you start to look at tight ends, that tells you, based on the names that I just read off a minute ago, George Kittle is on the roster. Braden Willis, the rookie, on the roster. Also, everybody, the people's tight end, the true people's tight end, Ross Dwelley, makes the initial roster, as does Charlie Werner. So of the rookies, the 49ers drafted Cameron Latu in the 3rd round. He is on IR, and he will not be able to come back because they placed him on IR now. I do not believe that they can bring him back later off of IR on the short term. So that's where we are at this point in terms of quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. The Latu going on the IR, that's the only thing that's a little bit of a surprise, even though I should have known that based off of what we heard on Saturday following the game, the knee injury that they brought up. Along the offensive line, based on what we know in terms of who's been waived, they have the starting guys, which is Trent Williams, Aaron Banks, Jake Brendel. At right guard, Spencer Burford. Right tackle, Holt McKivitz. And it looks like, as in terms of the other, let me go back and double check. I thought that I had seen Nick Zakel. Maybe I missed his name. They have Nick Zakel on this. They have kept 9 offensive linemen on their original 53. So in terms of their original 53, right now there's 9 offensive linemen. They're starting 5, who we talked about. They kept Jalen Moore. They kept Matt Pryor. They kept John Feliciano, and they kept Nick Zakel. So they kept 9 offensive linemen. Not really much of a surprise there, given what we were talking about earlier in terms of the 49ers' ability to hold on to another player. It makes sense that the player I think that they're holding on to that wouldn't be on this roster right now if Nick Bosa was signed, I think is Nick Zakel. Greg Escon says, I'm shocked they felt Dwelley and Warner wouldn't clear waivers. I don't think that it's a matter that they didn't feel they wouldn't clear waivers. I think that they just kept them because they wanted to keep 4 tight ends, and with Latu going on IR, that was their best group. And so that's the direction why they went in that way. Along the defensive line, the names, you guys can help me out here because I'm not looking at a roster right now. I haven't seen the actual roster as of yet. I'm basing my roster on who the 49ers have released so far based off of their roster moves, who there is. So on the defensive line, this one's going to be a little trickier. Let me see if I can figure this out for you in terms of that initial 53 list. Clelin Ferrell, his name wasn't on anything. Javon Hargrave, Eric Armstead, Drake Jackson. I think those are your top 4 in terms of that defensive line for the San Francisco 49ers. Also, in terms of guys that weren't released, Kevin Givens, Javon Kinlaw. That's 6. And I am struggling to figure out who the other names are that I'm not seeing quite yet. Maybe you guys know who. You guys can help me on this one. But right now I have Clelin Ferrell, Javon Hargrave, Eric Armstead, Drake Jackson, the 2 inside guys, Kevin Givens and Javon Kinlaw. Let me go through and let me look at one other spot. Kalia Davis, thank you. Somebody pointing Kalia Davis out, another interior player. That's a good one. Good call out there. Thank you for the shout on that one. This is the toughest one right here. T.Y. McGill, he was released, so no T.Y. McGill. He did not make the cut. He was one of the players whose names was on the list. It would be a lot easier if they just would let you know who made the roster instead of giving you the list here. It's fun, though, because it makes us have to do some work on the air, on the fly, get this all out to you guys. But so we got Kalia Davis. That's 7. Let's see what else. I don't see Robert Beal Jr.'s name on this list anywhere. So it looks like Robert Beal is going to make the original 53-man roster. The rookie out of Georgia, who is a surprise to me because he really didn't do a whole lot. He was almost a no-show, it seemed like at times. He makes it. Alex Barrett does not. And I think that's it. When looking at the 49ers roster, who they had, Kerry Hyder was released. Alex Barrett, Austin Bryant, all released. Same with T.Y. McGill and Marlon Davidson. So I think right now the 49ers have only 8 defensive linemen on their roster. Just in looking at what they sent out, looking at the players that they're saying were released, I'm counting 8 defensive linemen still. So based off of my unofficial count, the 49ers defensive line is set with Clelin Ferrell, Javon Hargrave, Eric Armstead, Drake Jackson, Kevin Givens, Javon Kinlaw, Kalia Davis, and Robert Beal Jr. 49ers are going to need to add another edge. We think Bosa would be that name, right? So Kalia Davis does make it. His name shows up on there. McGill shows up as one of the cuts. So looking at T.Y. McGill, the players that were released were Hyder Jr., McGill, as far as the vets. And there were some others that had been released prior to that. Now, let's get to the linebackers. At linebacker, then we know we've got Fred Warner, you've got Dre Greenlaw, Oren Burks, both of the rookies, D. Winters and Jalen Graham, Demetrius Flanagan Fowles. Name doesn't show up. And then also looking through, I'm trying to find one other name I don't see on this list. I do not see. Oh, there it is, Marcelino McCrary-Ball. So they also released Curtis Robinson. So that's six for the linebacker position for the 49ers. At cornerback, the 49ers have Charvarius Ward, Diamador Lenore, Ambry Thomas, Samuel Womack, Isaiah Oliver, right? Those are the names of those are the cornerbacks that they still have on the roster. And then at safety, you have Talanoa Hufanga, Tayshaun Gibson, Jair Brown, and George Odom. And then you have your three specialists. Just kind of looking through the numbers, that almost matches up exactly with what I put down as my breakdown in terms of not necessarily the players, but how this was going to break down. So you've got 3 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 6 wide receivers, 4 tight ends. I had 9 defensive linemen on my initial 53 that I put out yesterday. Instead, they went with 8. And on the offensive line where I had 8, they have 9 because they did keep Nick Zakelj over there. 5 cornerbacks, 4 safeties. So their secondary has 9. Their specialist, Jake Moody. Also, you have Mitch Wishnowsky, and then probably the best long snapper in the game today, Tabor Pepper. So there's the breakdown. Looking at the 49ers roster, when you look at this, kind of to see about the the surprises. The surprises for me are Isaiah Oliver making this roster. Deshaun Jameson was a player who I liked and I thought could make it. I put him on my 53 over Oliver, so that's a surprise there. That my surprise is that Oliver made it over Jameson, although I can understand why, because Jameson, I think for Jameson to really make it, he was going to need to have shown out in terms of the ability to help in the return game. That didn't really happen. So the other part with Isaiah Oliver is he has $2.91 million guaranteed this season. There's almost no benefit to them by releasing him. So Isaiah Oliver makes this roster. According to the reports that have come out, the 49ers do expect to bring back along that defensive line a couple of guys. Austin Bryant is expected back, as well as Kerry Hyder Jr. So right now they only have 8, but I think you're going to see that room change. I think you're going to see something happen with Robert Beal Jr. following the draft, and you might see it with Kalia Davis as well. She's not the draft, but after the cuts, get this all settled down, get your practice squad together, then you'll see them release or put some of these guys on injured reserve, like a guy like Robert Beal Jr. or Kalia Davis could be somebody that you put on IR, because once you do that after they make the 53, you can bring them back on that short term. So maybe you have 1 or 2 of those guys step out with those others coming in. So in terms of my surprises, if you guys have surprises on this list, that would be good. Rick Miramontes says Marcelino McCrary-Ball is really good. Can he still make the practice squad? Multiple question marks. See, Marcelino McCrary-Ball is a guy who to me stood out at times, but he just wasn't consistent enough. There's a lot to like there in terms of his athleticism that he brings to the spot. But it makes sense to me that Marcelino McCrary-Ball doesn't make this roster, and instead they decided to go with the 2 rookies. in Winters and Graham instead. I'm a little surprised when it comes to the linebackers that there was not a trade that has gone down yet. I'm a little surprised that Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles wasn't traded. I felt like he was a trade candidate based on where he is in his contract. This is his last year, likely not back with the 49ers. And so I would have thought he's a perfect trade candidate. There's been a lot of talk about that throughout this camp. And it was even mentioned this morning by one of the national reporters that there had been a lot of discussion with the 49ers with their possibility of them sending a linebacker through trade. So that would be a little bit of surprise there as well. So, I was kind of looking through one more time, looking through this roster again. No surprises. Quarterback, QB1 is Brock Purdy, Sam Darnold, Brandon Allen. All three of them make it. Running back room, the four running backs that you would expect: McCaffrey, Mitchell, Mason, Davis Price, and then Kyle Juszczyk. Wide receiver, that's where you see your first rookie in Ronnie Bell making the roster. They also keeping Danny Gray and Ray-Ray McCloud on their initial roster. Tight end, you get another rookie there with Braden Willis. He makes the roster. I'm not surprised by the 49ers deciding to keep Ross Dwelley. Dwelley's a core special teams guy. That's why he continues to make this roster, is his ability to play special teams. Ross Dwelley also has a lot of versatility. He has that ability to line up as a fullback at times if they need to. We've seen that throughout the preseason. So I think we'd see him in that area. No rookies along the offensive line. Robert Beal Jr. Makes it as a rookie. You get the two linebackers that are rookies, both Winters and Graham making it. In the secondary, you have Jair Brown at safety, and then you have the kicker making it there as well. So Moody. That's right. What you talking about, Willis? Willis makes the roster. That's a good one. I like Braden Willis. I think Braden Willis is a guy who, we're talking about Jack Colletto, right? And can Jack Colletto make it through waivers to come back to be the fullback? I think a guy like Braden Willis can be, if they aren't able to hold on to Jack Colletto, if Jack Colletto does get away here to another team, if somebody picks him up, because remember now, here's the thing: if you've waived these guys, if a team picks up a player off of waivers, they go automatically on their 53. So if there's a team out there that wants to add Jack Colletto to their 53-man roster, that's just too bad for the 49ers. Otherwise, I think he comes back to San Francisco. I think a guy like Braden Willis, though, if the 49ers do lose Jack Colletto, I think a guy like Braden Willis can be your fullback of the future. Maybe not so much of a fullback, more of the H-back, that tight end who slides into the backfield like what we used to see with the Washington teams back in the day, and they might still do it a little bit, but that seems to be a role that would fit really nicely for Braden Willis. We haven't really seen that much in training camp or since he joined the 49ers, but that would make a lot of sense there. As I mentioned already, we saw that with Ross Dwelley in years past. We saw that with Dwelley this year in training camp. We saw that with Troy Fumagalli as well. I think Fumagalli put up some good numbers. I'm not sure where the love for Troy Fumagalli has come from. A lot of people seem like they're surprised that he didn't make the roster. I'm not sure exactly why. Fumagalli was with the 49ers last year and didn't make it. I felt like his training camp this year was pretty much the same as last year. When you look at that tight end room, the deal with Latu is a bummer. I think that's the biggest one, is because I think Latu was brought in to replace Charlie Werner. Losing him to IR, that's a bummer. And I would say this, like, if you go back to 2021, Aaron Banks was a second-round pick of the 49ers, and everybody thought that Aaron Banks was a bust. Everybody thought Aaron Banks was just not good. He couldn't make it, all those types of things. And then what happened was everybody just kind of forgot about the fact that he got injured, right? And he comes back in 2022. He starts every game at left guard, a really nice left guard for the 49ers on last season's team. now going into a second season as a starter. Maybe that's going to be Cameron Latu, because I'll say this, like, I know that I was pretty hard on Latu in terms of throughout training camp because of the drops. And part of your job as a tight end is you've got to catch the ball when it's thrown to you, because you're a receiver at that point. But tight end also has a lot of other things that they do. They're pass blocking, run blocking, plus you have that need to route running and then the catching. He was really good at 3 of those 4. He was a really good route runner. He was a really good run blocker, and he was a really good pass blocker. And that showed up throughout training camp over and over and over again. You know, the problem there was that the drops showed up over and over and over again. So I'm a little bummed that Latu is not able to carry this thing through. That they put him on IR now. I would have liked to have seen him be able to make it onto the 53, then get put on with that ability to possibly come later off of it, but it didn't work out that way. So Cameron Latu goes to IR, and we'll see where he goes. But I think he's a guy who you get him through maybe a season of understanding the playbook, understanding the NFL level. You know, the other thing about Latu is this is a guy who didn't become a tight end until after he was already at Alabama for a couple of years. He was a D end originally for Alabama. So he didn't start playing tight end until just a couple of years ago. And now to be in the NFL, that's a tough transition. Not making excuses for him. We'll see where it all plays out. It might just end up being a bad pick at the end of the day, but he's not going anywhere at this point, and we'll see which direction they choose to go with him down the road. But I'm a little surprised on Latu, just because of that from that standpoint. Yeah, and then Darrell Luter, yes, he's not on IR. He is on the PUP list. That means that he cannot come back for the first 4 weeks of the season. He's out for those first 4. Robbie 439 says, speaking of Brock Purdy, seen him as QB1 after starting off last season as QB3. It's insanity. His story really is incredible so far, and it really is. You know, I think last year when you look at him as being QB3, right? Part of I think the reason he was QB3 was he was never going to be QB1, and I thought he had a really nice camp. I understood them keeping him last year. It was a matter of for a lot of it, I doubted whether they were going to keep him. And the only reason I doubted that they were going to keep him over Sudfeld was because Nate Sudfeld had that $2 million guarantee that he had been paid. So I felt like they were going to, because of the money that they invested, they were going to stick with Sudfeld. They chose not to. They chose to go with Purdy. The fact that he's gone, like you said, though, from 3 to 1, and the 49ers see him as their starting quarterback, and the 49ers have made moves at that position to solidify Brock Purdy as their quarterback of the future. That rise is really amazing. And it goes back to a lot of the conversation I had here on the channel last night. I had Bish on, and we talked a lot about both Trey Lance and his time here. We talked about Brock Purdy and what he can do and what he can't do, because, you know, if you want to hear people talk about the negatives with Brock Purdy, it's all out there. And it's hard to say that they're wrong. You can't. Is Brock Purdy going to be, is he the biggest, the strongest, the fastest? Absolutely not. Is he a guy that's going to throw the ball 70 yards downfield? Never. But what he does do is he's able to operate the 49ers offense at a high level. He has enough arm to make all of the throws that the 49ers want made in their offense. Everything that they have, he can make those throws. And I think the other part of it is that to an extent, we kind of downplay what he does, because of what he does is he makes everything look so easy. It's also effortless looking for Brock Purdy, that it's like, oh, that's just a nice little easy throw. And then you watch somebody else go out and try that same throw, and it's like not so easy. And I think that's part of it when it comes to Brock Purdy, is we overlook how difficult the position is and how easy he is making it look. Fish and Chips wants to know about Willie Snead or Chris Conley. They were both. Neither one of them are on the initial 53-man roster. Willie Snead and Chris Conley both were released. I think that Willie Snead has a really good chance of making it back on the practice squad. Chris Conley maybe as well, but I like Willie Snead's chances better than Chris Conley from the standpoint. We've already seen this happen with Willie Snead. Willie Snead is a nice player in that he has special teams ability, and that versatility is big. So I think that's why a guy like Willie Snead coming back over Chris Conley would make sense for me. In terms of the other receivers, Tay Martin as a possibility. I would really like to see Isaiah Winstead be brought back. If they can only bring back 2 receivers, just to say they go into this and they're saying on the practice squad, we're going to keep 2 receivers. I would say you bring back Willie Snead and you bring back Isaiah Winstead. I like Snead because I think he's a nice receiver and he has that versatility for special teams. And I really like Isaiah Winstead because I just think he's a better wide receiver than Tate Martin. He's not a burner. He's not going to blow people the top off the defense. Tate Martin's not going to do that either. But this is a guy who I think has really good hands, and he has sneaky speed, and he can do things after he gets the ball in his hands that some of these other guys that they have to possibly bring in. If you're just looking at guys that have already been on the roster, I think that's why I would give the nod to Isaiah Winstead over Tate Martin, and I'd give Winstead the nod over Anthony Miller and Chris Conley as well. So that's kind of where I'm leaning in that way. Who is the guy who hurt his arm on the long catch? That's Chris Conley. He's the one on the diving catch along the right sideline from Sam Darnold. He sprained the one of the joints in his shoulder on that play. So that's not happening. Not sure how this came up, but Red Eye pointing out how Kurt Warner had 4 years of college and 2 years of arena football before being signed by the Rams. Trey Lance, now Dallas Cowboy, didn't have any of that. And I think that's the other thing. I saw somebody put out there today about players coming up from the FCS level, and I get where he's coming from because people using the FCS level competition against Trey Lance, I wouldn't put that against him because I know there's a lot of really good quarterbacks who have come from that FCS level who have gone on to be really good quarterbacks in the NFL. You know, just some of the names right off the top of my head, Phil Simms would be one. Phil Simms is who actually the 49ers wanted to get in the first round of that 1979 draft, but instead Joe Montana ended up being the pick, but they wanted Phil Simms. Steve McNair, you know, of the Houston Texans, Tennessee Titan fame, the guy that played at the FCS level. I remember watching him play in college and the things that he was doing there. And it took him a little bit of time once he got to the NFL, but he got there and he became a really good quarterback in the NFL. More recent times, you look at the quarterback, Joe Flacco, who beat the 49ers. And there's a lot of them. Tony Romo, Jimmy Garoppolo. There's a lot of those guys. So I think the bigger picture, though, when you're looking at that, when it comes to Trey Lance, is this. With Trey Lance, he only played 17 games at that level. And unlike those other players who I just named, Lance was playing on the best team in that level. Like he was playing on, you know, there's Alabama, and people talk about how Alabama quarterbacks can't make it, what have you. And that's fine to an extent. But the team that Trey Lance was playing on was the Alabama FCS. I mean, if we're being honest, the North Dakota State team in 2019 probably could have beat some of the FBS teams that were bowl level teams in the lower levels of the FBS. That was an extremely talented team. And you saw him running over people in the run game. That's why, like, when Trey Lance was drafted, Mina Kimes, who a lot of people like from ESPN, the first thing she said is that the 49ers got themselves a bulldozer of a quarterback because of his ability to run over people at North Dakota State. And then you flash forward to the next year when they're using him as a running back or quarterback, but they're using him in the running game, and they're using him in the ways that they use him, and everybody's starting to wonder why. It's, well, did you watch this guy play in college? Niners Giants week 2. That's going to be week 3 this year, right? They're playing the 49ers at Pittsburgh, 49ers at Rams to open up. Thursday night game against the Giants week 3 is the home opener. Quad going to take 3 weeks. Well, and we'll see. That's the thing, right? I don't know if that's something that's been reported. I'm not on Twitter right now to see all of the latest because I'm here chatting with all you good folks. But there you have it. The 49ers, their initial roster coming out. Not very many surprises, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of their 9 draft picks make the initial 53-man roster. The 3 quarterbacks, as you would expect, Purdy, Darnold, Allen, the running backs, as you would expect. The first surprise coming at tight end, where Cameron Latu was placed on IR. On the next offensive line, Nick Zakelj making it. I think that's a surprise. I think Robert Beal Jr. making it is a surprise as well. Isaiah Oliver at cornerback is a little bit of a surprise just because of his performance. I don't think he deserved it, but this is the guy that they gave a lot of guaranteed money to. So he makes that roster, and we'll see where they go from here. Robbie wants to know, why did the Cardinals get a pass by the media? Josh Rosen equals bust, and now Kyler is injured and looking like another bust. Who wears? Well, those things, that's not. But this is a good point, right? The Josh Rosen at number 10 overall, Kyler Murray number 1 overall. Rosen was definitely a bust. Kyler Murray was taken number 1 over Nick Bosa. Just think about that for a second. The difference here for the reason that they're getting a pass in Arizona compared to the 49ers is that the Cardinals didn't trade up in any of these scenarios. They didn't trade up to get Josh Rosen. They didn't trade up to get Kyler Murray, right? Those were just guys who they took where they were. Josh Rosen, taken number 10 overall, he lasted 1 season, and then they brought in Kyler Murray, if you remember that. I mean, shoot, if you remember back in 2021 when everybody thought the 49ers were going to move on from Jimmy Garoppolo, there were several articles and discussions about Josh Rosen being the next big thing and replacing Jimmy Garoppolo in San Francisco in 2021. If you don't believe me, just look it up on Twitter or on YouTube. There's a lot of people that were pushing the Josh Rosen hype train in 2021, and he didn't even make it to the first preseason game, I don't think, with that team out here in San Francisco. He ended up in Atlanta, and he's bounced around the NFL. So, but there you have it. There again, the 49ers, that my instant reaction to the 49ers 53-man roster. My only surprises are Cameron Latu at tight end. They still took 4, which I thought they were going to take. My biggest surprise is that when I look at the numbers at each position, I just got lucky, and I got all the numbers right except for offensive line and defensive line. Those 2 numbers flipped. I thought they were going to keep 8 offensive linemen, 9 defensive linemen. They kept 9 O linemen and 8 D linemen. That's going to change. Nick Bosa is going to get signed. The numbers are going to change around. I think Nick Zakelj is a guy who will get bumped once Nick Bosa's deal gets signed. I think along that defensive line, as you've seen already, you've heard, you're going to see Austin Bryant, Kerry Hyder brought back. But beyond that, I think this, and Isaiah Oliver, but beyond that, I think this was a pretty solid roster that didn't have a lot of surprises. I think this is looking pretty good. We'll be breaking it down. Keep it locked in here to Inside the 49ers with Jack Hammer. I'll be bringing you more information as it breaks because this is the initial 53-man roster of the 49ers. It is not the final 53-man roster of the 49ers, and it's not even the roster that the 49ers are going to be taking into week 1 at Pittsburgh. So as Aussie Rules says, if you can do me a favor, hey all, please hit the like, and he puts that in caps. So yes, please, Raphael 5629ers, member of the Toolbox. He's saying it for me. Guys, before you leave, you can do me 3 things. Please hit the like button. If you're watching the channel and you're not already subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. And then after you hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications, because with those notifications on, you're not going to miss any of the updates right here on Inside the 49ers with Jack Hammer. I appreciate everybody for making their time in the middle of the day to come on and watch this. Maybe you're watching it later on. Regardless, I appreciate you. Have a great day. Like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, everybody. Have a great day. We'll be talking with you soon.